4 lines in the Sentinel. My 11 o'clock on the morning of Thursday the 9th of October was Mr. Simeon Gaunt, and I set that down first because everything else in this narrative follows from it, and because I did not know it at the time. I had kept 2 rooms in Queen Anne Street since the summer before, and I saw patients in them on 3 mornings a week, which was as much practice as a man of my age and my other occupations wanted. Most of them were people I had known for years. Gaunt had come to me in the April of that year on the recommendation of an oculist named Sladen, with a failing sight that neither of us could do anything for, and by October he had settled into a habit of coming on the 2nd Thursday of the month and staying rather longer than the case required. He was 53 and looked a good deal more. He was a printer's reader on a London morning paper, and had been on that paper for 30 years, which is to say that his trade was the correction of other men's errors, and he had the 2 marks of it that I have since noticed in every man of that calling I have met: a stoop that came from the shoulders and not the back, and an absolute unwillingness to let a wrong statement go by, in any company, on any subject, however small. He was a small, very clean grey man in a black coat that had been brushed until it shone in the wrong places. He wore steel spectacles pushed up on his forehead and used a hand lens to read, and his fingernails were cut straight across, and there was ink in the creases of his right forefinger that had been there for 40 years and would not come out. That morning I looked at his eyes and told him what I had told him in July and in August, which was that the central sight was going and would go, and that I could keep him comfortable and could not keep him reading. How long? A year at the outside for close work, less if you persist with it by gaslight. Ah, said Gaunt. He put his spectacles down on his knee and looked at the window, which he could still do. Well, I've read enough. There is a species of small talk that goes on in a consulting room after the business is done, and I have never seen any reason to hurry it, and I have learned more medicine from it than from the Lancet. Gaunt talked slowly and dryly, and with a great deal of precision, and he had the habit, common in men who work all night, of talking about things 40 years off, as though they were in the next street. He talked that morning about his father. He had talked about his father before, in July, and once in the spring. I knew that his name had been Hector Gaunt, and that he had been a corn merchant at Wisbeach in the Fen country, and that something had gone wrong with the business when Simeon was 9 years old, and that after that there had been the Wisbeach Union workhouse, and a great deal else. He never told it as a grievance. He told it as a man tells the specification of a machine. He was a good merchant, he said. He were 43, and he'd 40 year of it in front of him, and he'd never had a bill come back in his life, and it took 9 days. 9 days, from the Thursday to the Saturday week. Gaunt held up his hand and turned it over, which was a gesture I had seen him make before, as though he were showing me a page. Doctor, I'll tell you what I've never been able to get any man to understand, and I've give up trying. It weren't a bank, it weren't a bad harvest, and it weren't a partner, and it weren't drink. It were 4 lines of print in a newspaper, and they weren't true, and nobody in this world was ever asked to answer for them. I said something about the law of libel, which was, I am afraid, the level of my contribution. There was an action, said Gaunt. It failed. There generally is, and it generally does. He put his spectacles back on his forehead, and they printed 2 lines 11 days after to say they'd been misinformed, and they printed them at the bottom of a column, and there wasn't a creditor in the eastern counties read them, and my father were in the Gazette by then, and the shop was shut, and my mother had took the little uns to her sister at March. And you? I were 9. I went into a printing house at 11-year-old, because it were the only door in Wisbeach that opened, said Gaunt, and I have been in one ever since, and I have read, by my own reckoning, something over 11 million errors, and I have took out every one of them, and it is a very good trade, and I have no complaint of it whatever. He said it perfectly evenly. I remember thinking, as I wrote his name in my daybook, and asked him to come on the 2nd Thursday of November, that he was one of the more remarkable men I had attended, and that there was a kind of iron in him that I did not entirely like. That was the 9th. The 14th was the following Tuesday. Mr. Barnabas Kelso, of Elm Park Gardens, South Kensington, was 71 years old, and had been for 18 years the managing director of a colour and varnish works at Silvertown, and had resigned the chairmanship of it in the March of that year on the express instructions of his physician, having had 2 attacks of angina pectoris in the winter. He was a churchwarden of St. Luke's. He had given £150 to the Great Ormond Street Hospital in each of the last 4 years, and had asked that it be acknowledged as from a friend. He was a widower, and lived with his unmarried daughter Augusta, who was 44, and there was one son, Frederick, who had gone out to Manitoba in 1894, and had a wheat farm near Selkirk, and a wife and 3 children whom his father had never seen. At 8:20 on the morning of Tuesday, the 14th of October, Miss Augusta Kelso came down to the breakfast-room ahead of her father, as she always did, and opened the Morning Sentinel, as she always did, and read out to him such things as she thought he would care about, as she always did. She got as far as the 2nd column of the 5th page. I have the account of what followed from 3 people, and they do not differ in any particular that matters. She read the first 4 words aloud before she understood them. Then she stopped and made a sound, and her father, who was standing at the sideboard with a plate in his hand, said, "What is it?" And she said, "Nothing, Papa, nothing," and folded the paper, which was the worst thing she could have done, and the only human thing. He took it out of her hands. He set the plate down, and took the paper and opened it, and looked at the place where her thumb had been, and she says that he read the name and no more, because he did not turn his head or move his eyes along, and that he said quite quietly, "That is not right," and put his hand on the back of a chair. He was dead in 11 minutes. Dr. Halliday of Sloane Street was in the house within a quarter of an hour, and certified syncope in a case of long-standing angina, and there is not a coroner in England who would have looked at it twice, and none did. Frederick Kelso's cable reached Elm Park Gardens on the Friday. He was alive. He was at Selkirk. He had not been in a boat since the spring, and his father's death was the first news he had of any of it. Holmes had the whole business on our table on the Saturday afternoon, and he had it because the Morning Sentinel had brought it to him. The editor came himself, which I thought said something for him. Mr. Aubrey Meldon was about 50, with a clever, worn, hurried face, and a good deal of grey in his beard, and he sat down and put his hat on the floor and said, "Mr. Holmes, somebody has printed a paragraph in my paper, and I cannot find out who, and I am going to be sued for a great deal of money, and that is the least of it." "Begin at the paragraph." It is 4 lines in the 5th page of Tuesday's 2nd edition, and in nothing else. It is not in the 1st edition, of which we print 11,000 for the country mails. It is in the 2nd and the 3rd, which is about 54,000 copies. Meldon took a folded cutting from his pocket-book and put it on the table. It announces the death by drowning of a Mr. Frederick Kelso of Manitoba. Mr. Frederick Kelso is in Manitoba and in excellent health. His father read that paragraph at his breakfast on Tuesday morning and died of it inside a quarter of an hour. And you cannot trace it. I have had 4 days at it, and I have got precisely nowhere, and I have been in newspapers since I was 19. He leaned forward. Mr. Holmes, understand what I am telling you. There is no copy for that paragraph. There is no order for it. There is no take-slip. There is no entry in the copybook. It is not in the sub-editor's file. It is not on any spike in the building, and there is not one man on my staff of 43 who will admit to having seen it before it was in print. And it is in my paper, and my paper is a machine that exists for the single purpose of ensuring that nothing gets into it that has not passed through 4 pairs of hands. Holmes had the cutting under his lens. Where does a false paragraph ordinarily come from? Outside. 9 times in 10 it comes from outside, from a man who wants a thing believed, and it comes as a paid notice through the advertisement counter downstairs, and there is a receipt for it, and a clerk who took the money, and a handwritten order in a drawer. Meldon's mouth twisted. That is what I looked for first, and there is nothing. It did not come through the counter. Whoever put that paragraph in my paper did not pay for it, and did not want a record of it, and knew, therefore, exactly where in a newspaper office there is no record kept. And where is that? You had better come and see, said Mr. Aubrey Meldon, and you had better come at midnight, because between 11 at night and 3 in the morning, that building is a different animal, and it is the animal you want. The offices of the Morning Sentinel stood in a court off Shoe Lane, and if you have never been inside such a building at 1 in the morning, I do not know that I can give you it, but I shall try, because the case is the building. You come in off a wet street where there is nobody, into a lobby where there is a commissionaire and a smell of gas and hot metal, and you are handed up a stone stair. On the first floor there is a corridor of little rooms with their doors open and their fires out, and in 3 of them men are writing, and nobody looks up. At the end of the corridor is the sub-editor's room, which is 1 long table under 4 gas globes, with 6 men round it in their shirt-sleeves and their hats on, and every one of them is cutting a sheet of paper into pieces with a pair of scissors, and writing on the pieces, and putting them into a wire basket, and a boy comes and takes the basket away every 4 minutes, as long as you stand there. Above that is the composing room, and the composing room is the loudest room I have ever been in that had no engine in it. There were 9 linotype machines along the wall that night, clattering like looms, with a man at each of them reading from a copy holder at his elbow, and behind them 30 frames where men were setting the advertisements and the headings by hand out of cases, and the whole floor was under a light so hard that everything in it had 2 shadows. And at the far end, on iron legs, there were the stones, 4 flat surfaces of polished stone the size of a dinner table, and on each of them a page of the paper lying face up in an iron frame, made of type, in reverse, wedged tight. That is a forme. When the forme is finished, it is wheeled away to be molded, and the mold goes to the foundry, and the metal plate that comes back off the mold goes on the rotary machine in the cellar, and after that, nothing in this world can be altered. Between the composing room and the machines, in a glass closet 9 feet by 6, with a bench and a gas jet and a chair, sits the reader. Meldon took us into that closet at 10 minutes to 1 in the morning, and there was nobody in it. And he put his hand on the bench. "This," he said, "is the last pair of eyes." Explain the office. He reads the proofs of every column in the paper. A boy sits there and reads the original copy aloud to him, while he follows the proof and marks it. He marks the errors of the machine and the errors of the sub-editors, and, if he is a good reader, the errors of fact as well. Meldon looked round the little room with an expression I could not read. He is not the highest man in this building, and he is not the best paid. He is the only one who sees the whole of it. Who is he? There are two. Mr. Lorimer does the first half of the night. Mr. Gaunt does the second half, and has done for 22 years, and he is on the stone with his revises from about 12:30 until the second edition goes down. I heard that name, and it did nothing to me at all. I want to be truthful about it. I heard it in a glass box at 1 in the morning, with 9 linotypes going, and I thought, that is a name I know from somewhere, and I put my hands behind my back and looked at the ceiling, and it went out of my head for 4 days. Holmes had not sat down since we came into the building. He now asked Meldon 11 questions in about 3 minutes, and I set them down, because the whole of the case is in the answers. Where is the paragraph in the second edition? Page 5, second column, 10 lines from the foot, between a report of a Board of Trade inquiry and a paragraph about a fire at Rotherhithe. Is it in the first edition? It is not. Then when was it put in? Between the first edition going down at 12:55 and the second going down at 10 minutes past 2. Who alters a page between editions? The overseer of the composing room, Mr. Bowyer, on the instruction of the night editor, Mr. Wace, who sends down a written slip, and the actual alteration is made on the stone by a stone hand, and the corrected page is then read again by the reader before it is moulded. How many men are on that floor at that hour? Between 50 and 60. How many of them can lay a hand on a form that is locked up on the stone? 4. The overseer, 2 stone hands, and the reader. Is there a record of what is changed between editions? There is the night editor's slip, and there is the overseer's book. And is the paragraph in either? No, said Meldon. That is the whole of my difficulty. There is a slip for the second edition, and it orders 3 changes. A fresh 2 paragraphs on the cabinet, a correction of a name in the police news, and the closing prices. All 3 were made. The paragraph about Mr. Kelso is not on that slip, and it is not in Bowyer's book, and it is in the paper. Holmes turned round. Then it was not ordered, it was not paid for, it was not written down, and it appeared in 54,000 copies of a London newspaper. Mr. Meldon, I am obliged to you. You have brought me a thing I have not had for some years, which is a crime that could not have been committed by anybody outside a particular trade. Now, let us have the men." Miss Augusta Kelso received us at Elm Park Gardens on the Sunday afternoon, and I have seldom been in a house that was less able to hold what had happened in it. It was a tall, comfortable, dull house, with a good deal of oak in it, and photographs of Manitoba on the piano, and she was 44, and had kept it for her father for 11 years since her mother's death, and she was perfectly composed for the first 8 minutes, and then not composed at all for about 2, and then composed again for the remaining hour, which is the way of women who have had to run a household through a death. "You will want the breakfast room," she said. "Everybody has wanted the breakfast room. Dr. Halliday, and the man from the Sentinel, and my cousin, and now you. It is through here, and there is nothing in it." There was nothing in it. It was a small square room at the back, with a window on a garden and a sideboard, and a round table with 4 chairs, and one of the chairs had been taken away, which nobody had told them to do, and somebody had done. He came down at 8:20. He always came down at 8:20. I came down at 8 because I opened the letters and looked at the paper first, and read him out what he would care about, which was the shipping and the city and any death he might know. She stopped. Any death he might know. "Miss Kelso, I am going to ask you to go through the next 2 minutes as slowly as you can bear." I have gone through them 400 times, and it does not take any longer. She gave it to us then, and she gave it well, and I have set the substance of it down already, and shall not repeat it. 2 things came out of that hour that were new. The first was that she had not read the paragraph aloud. She had read the 4 words, "We regret to record," and had then read the rest of it with her eyes, and not her mouth, and had made a sound, and folded the paper. And your father asked what it was. He said, "What is it?" He was at the sideboard with a plate in his hand, and I said, "Nothing, Papa," and I folded it. She looked at the table. "Mr. Holmes, I have been told by 3 people that I did the only thing anybody would have done, and that I am not to reproach myself, and I should be glad if you would not say it, because I am going to reproach myself until I die, and I would rather not be argued with about it." "I had not the smallest intention of saying it," said Holmes. "What did he do?" "He put the plate down, and took the paper out of my hands, and opened it at the fold, and looked at it." "For how long?" She had not been asked that before. I watched her think about it. "Not long, 2 or 3 seconds, and then he said, 'That is not right.'" "His eyes, did they move along the lines, or did they stop?" "They stopped." She said it slowly. "I remember that, because I remember thinking, he has not read it. He has only seen Frederick's name, and I must tell him, and I did not know how. And then he said what he said, and put his hand on the back of that chair, and I never told him anything at all." The second thing was the paper itself, which she had kept, and which she went upstairs for and brought down in a drawer of the sideboard, and it was folded exactly as her thumb had folded it at 4 minutes past 8 in the morning on the 14th of October. Holmes took it to the window and looked at it for a long time, and then folded it again along her crease and gave it back to her, and did not say what he had seen, and did not tell me until the April. We had 5 minutes with Dr. Halliday in Sloane Street on the way home, and he was a sensible, careful man of 60 who had been in that district 30 years. Would a shock do it? A shock would do it, and nothing else was needed. Halliday put his hands in his pockets. I had told him in the march, in terms, that his life depended on his being spared any sudden agitation, and I had told his daughter the same, and I have written it in my day-book, and if you want the day-book, you may have it. He had a diseased heart, and a very slight further demand upon it would end him, and it did. Would you have certified as you did if you had known about the paragraph? Halliday looked at him. I should have certified exactly as I did, he said, because it is what he died of. Syncope in a case of angina. The certificate is not wrong, Mr. Holmes. It is merely not the whole of it, and the certificate has no place on it for the whole of it, and there is no printed form in England that has. On the Monday morning we went to Scotland Yard, and I record what happened there because it altered the whole shape of the fortnight. Inspector Alec MacDonald was a long, bony, grave young Aberdonian with a heavy jaw and a habit of listening with his eyes shut, and Holmes had a considerable respect for him and showed it in the way he showed such things, which was by telling him the case in 4 minutes without any ornament at all. MacDonald sat for a while with his fingers together. Mr. Holmes, he said, I'll tell you my trouble, and you'll see it as quick as I do. What have I got? You have a homicide. I have a certificate. MacDonald opened one eye. Signed by a physician of 30 years' standing, in a case he'd attended for 8 months, giving a cause of death that no man on earth disputes, including you. There's been no inquest. There'll be no inquest, for the coroner has no jurisdiction where a doctor certifies and nobody complains. And nobody has complained, and the man's buried at Brompton this 10 days. There is a false paragraph in a newspaper. There is, and that's a matter for the newspaper and for Mr. Frederick Kelso's solicitors, and I hope they take a great deal of money off them. He leaned forward. Sir, I'm not being obstructive, and you know it. There's no crime reported to this office. If I go into Shoe Lane and turn out 40 men, I'm doing it on my own responsibility, with nothing whatever on the sheet, and the first question I'll be asked is what offense I'm inquiring into, and the honest answer this morning is that I don't know that there is one. Then let me put it to you as a question of fact and not of law, said Holmes. Somebody in this city composed 29 words with the object of stopping an old man's heart, and did it, and is at this moment at work in a building in Shoe Lane. Do you want him found? MacDonald shut both eyes again. Aye, he said, I want him found. And I'll tell you what I can do, and it's not much. I can be a private gentleman with an interest in newspapers. I can look at anything you put in front of me, and I can put nobody in the box. And if you bring me a man and a confession, I'll take him up on a charge I'll have to think of on the stairs, and it'll be the queerest sheet I ever wrote. He stood up. And I'll say one thing more, since we're being plain. If you'd come to me with a bottle of poison, you'd have had 4 constables by dinner-time. Because it's print, you've got me and nothing else, and I've been in this force 11 years, and I've never once had to explain that a man can be killed by something that isn't there. We had the men over the next 3 days, and I have never done anything in my life that so nearly made me despair of human veracity. There were 9 of them whose account of that night mattered, and every single one of them was lying, and not one of the 9 lies had the smallest thing to do with Barnabas Kelso. Mr. Godfrey Wace, the night editor, was a heavy, anxious man of 55, with a wife and 5 daughters at Muswell Hill, and he had stated to Meldon that he was in his room from midnight until 2:30. He was not. He had gone out at 12:15, and had come back at 10 minutes to 2, and for 6 days he preferred to be suspected of the murder of a stranger rather than say where he had been, and when Holmes got it out of him, he wept. His eldest brother was dying in a room in Hatton Garden of a disease that Wace had not told his own wife about, and Wace had been going out for an hour every night for 5 weeks and leaving the paper to his chief sub-editor, which was a thing that would have cost him his place and his character in the trade, and which he had done 31 nights running. Mr. Lionel Fitch, chief sub-editor, aged 30, had stated that he was at the long table all night. He was, and he was also, between 1 and 2 in the morning, writing 1,100 words of a signed weekly article for an evening paper of the opposite politics under the name of Cato, for which he was paid 3 guineas and would have been dismissed within the hour if it had come out. He lied about the hour and blushed about it, and was of no use to anybody. Mr. Nathan Boyer, overseer of the composing room, 4 and 50, stated that he had been on the stone the whole of the 2nd edition change. He had been on the stone for the first 2 alterations, and had then gone down to the machine room for 18 minutes because a bearing was running hot, which was his duty, but which he did not care to mention because he had told the machine room foreman a fortnight earlier that the bearing was sound. Thomas Skeet, Stonehand, aged 26, was lying because he had for 4 months been carrying 6 early copies of the paper out of the building at 3 in the morning and selling them at Ludgate Circus to a man who wanted the closing prices before anybody else had them, at 3 pence a copy, which is not a large crime, and was quite enough to hang him with in his own mind. The other Stonehand, William Rooke, was lying to cover Skeet because they lodged in the same house. The boy, Snell, who carried the baskets, was lying because he had been asleep for 40 minutes on a heap of paper in the passage. Mr. Rufus Gell, of the counting-house, was lying about a matter of returns and unsold copies which had nothing to do with anything, and which cost his employers about £11 a year. The commissionaire in the lobby was lying because he had let a man in at 1:30 to see Mr. Fitch, and the man was a bookmaker's clerk, and the commissionaire had had 6 pence. And Edward Aspinall, aged 19, who was the reader's copyholder, and who sat in that glass closet 6 nights a week, reading copy aloud to Mr. Gaunt, was lying, and lied longer and better than any of them, and I shall come to him. I shall give one of the 9 in full, because a summary makes a fool of it. We had Godfrey Wace at Baker Street on the Tuesday evening, at his own request, which Holmes had contrived so cunningly that the man believed it was his own idea, and he came at 9 and sat on the edge of the basket chair, and did not take his gloves off for 20 minutes. He began by going over his statement, which he had by heart, and he went over it 3 times in slightly different words, which is what a man does who is guarding one sentence in the middle of it. From midnight until 2:30, I was in my room, and I saw the 2nd edition slip made out and sent down at 20 minutes past 1, and I saw nothing and heard nothing out of the way. "Mr. Wace," said Holmes, "how long has your brother been ill?" I have never seen a man come apart so quickly. He got up out of the chair and stood in the middle of our carpet and said, "Who told you that?" twice, and then sat down again in a different chair, as though he had forgotten which one he had come out of. Nobody told me. You have been out of that building for an hour every night for 5 weeks, and you have gone eastward, because the mud on your boots on a wet night in Shoe Lane is one thing going west, and another going up towards Hatton Garden, and I have looked at your boots twice. You have come back at 10 minutes to 2 with your collar wrong, and a man who is doing something disgraceful for an hour a night does not do it 31 nights running, because disgraceful things are not so regular. A duty is regular. So it is a duty, and it is one you cannot name, and you are 55 and have a wife and 5 daughters, and there is only one kind of duty that a man in that position hides. Wace put his hands over his face and told us. His brother was 2 years older and had been a schoolmaster at Highgate, and was dying in a room in Hatton Garden of a disease I shall not name, which he had got in a manner that would have finished the family in the eyes of every person they knew. There was nobody else. Wace had been going to him at 12:15 every night for 5 weeks, sitting an hour and coming back and writing his leader notes, and he had left the paper in Fitch's hands, and had told Fitch he was going to the club. If Meldon knew, I should be out on the Saturday, not for the brother, for the hour. He looked up, and his face was wet and quite steady. Do you understand? Not for the shame of it, for leaving the paper. That's the trade. A night editor who is not in the building is nothing at all. He does know, said Holmes. Wace stared at him. He has known since the 3rd week. He told me so on Saturday afternoon, before he told me anything else about anybody. And he told me because he was afraid I should find it out and put it in front of you. And he wished me to hear first that he was aware of it, and had said nothing, and intended to say nothing, and that he would be obliged if I would not oblige him too. Holmes got up and rang the bell. You will now drink some whiskey, and you will go home, and on Thursday you will find that you have been given the loan of a fortnight's leave, and you will not ask why. And I shall tell you the one thing that matters to you, which is that you had nothing whatever to do with the death of Mr. Barnabas Kelso, and I have known it since Sunday. Then why in God's name have you been at me for 3 days? Because I could not know it until I knew what you were hiding, said Holmes, and there is no way of finding out what a man is hiding, except to make him afraid you will hang him for it. It is the ugliest part of my trade, and I have never found any way round it, and I apologize to you, and it will happen again next week to somebody else. It is the most instructive week I have had in 5 years, said Holmes on the Wednesday evening, when we had the 9 of them written out. Watson, look at what we have. 9 men in one building on one night, and every man of them has a private and separate reason to be untruthful about the same 2 hours, and not one of the reasons is a murder. A brother dying of the pox, 3 guineas from a rival, a hot bearing, 6pence for a bookmaker's clerk, a boy asleep, and the composite effect of 9 unconnected lies is a fog exactly as dense as a conspiracy, and it did not cost anybody a farthing to arrange, and nobody arranged it. It is the ordinary state of any 9 people, I said. It is the ordinary state of any 9 people, and it is the reason the police so often go wrong, and I include myself. He tapped the sheets. Strip each lie down to its own private cause, and put the causes on one side. What is left over is the lie that is about the crime. There is one. There is always one. And after 4 days, I can tell you that it is not Wace's, and it is not Fitch's, and it is not Boyer's, or Skeet's, or Rook's, or the boys', or Gell's, or the commissionaire's. And that leaves me with a boy of 19, who has told me 7 times, in 7 slightly different sets of words, that nothing whatever unusual happened in that closet on Monday night. Edward Aspinall we had twice, and neither time did any good, and the second time I came away liking him better than anybody in the case. He was 19, and had been a copyholder for 2 years, which is the humblest paid post in a newspaper office, and consists of sitting in a glass box for 6 hours a night, reading other men's words aloud to a man who is not looking at you. He had a thin face and a bad cough, and a collar that had been turned, and he stood in the corridor outside the composing room with his hands behind him and answered everything. On Monday night, between 1 and 2, what happened in the reader's closet?
Nothing, sir. Nothing at all.
We read page 5 and we read page 8, and there was the change for the 2nd edition, and we read that. The boy's eyes did not move from Holmes's face, which is a thing the honest do not generally trouble to arrange. It were an ordinary night. Did you leave the closet? No, sir. Not once? Not once, sir. Holmes let a silence go on for about 10 seconds, which is a long time in a corridor. Mr. Aspinall, I am going to tell you 2 things. The first is that I do not believe you. The second is that I do not think you are lying to protect yourself, and if you were, you would have done it better. Because a boy of 19 who has done something wrong says too much, and you have said too little. He put on his hat. You may think about that until Thursday. We had him again on the Thursday, and he had thought about it and had got a good deal better at it, which in my experience is what a truthful person does when he has decided to go on lying. He tidies it. It were an ordinary night, sir, and I never left the closet, and if I did leave it, I never left it above a minute. And Mr. Gaunt were at the stone the whole while, same as he always is. Which of those 3 statements would you like to keep? The boy went red to the ears and said nothing. You have just told me that he was at the stone the whole while, which you could not know if you were in the closet, and which you have volunteered without being asked, and which is therefore the thing you came here to say. Holmes looked at him for a moment. Go back to your work. I am not going to bully a boy who is trying to be loyal to somebody, and I shall find out who it is by Saturday, and when I do, I shall be sorry that I did. He was very quiet on the stairs going down. That is the one, he said. That is the 9th lie, and it is the only one in the building that has a person on the other end of it instead of a secret. Watson, when a man lies to save himself, he lies about what he did. That boy has lied twice about what somebody else did, and he has done it without being asked, and he is 19 years old and frightened, and there is no possibility whatever that he is frightened of the police. The physical evidence came on the Thursday, and it came from the overseer. Holmes had asked for the metal, which was an intelligent request, and one that Bowyer had not expected. When a page has been molded and the plate cast, the form of type is unlocked, and the type is thrown back into the machines to be melted, and in 24 hours it is gone. But the Sentinel, like most careful officers, kept the forms of the previous night standing until the following evening, in case of a dispute, and page 5 of Tuesday's second edition had been broken up on Wednesday. What survived was better. It was the last revise. The proof pulled off page 5 after the second edition change and before the molding, which is the sheet the reader passes. Bowyer laid it on the stone under the hard light, and the three of us leaned over it, and I saw the 4 lines about Frederick Kelso sitting in the middle of that column, and I felt something go down my back. "Mr. Bowyer," said Holmes, "your paper is set upon the machines." "The body of it is. 9 linotypes, and we're putting in 3 more at the new year." "And this paragraph?" Bowyer put his own glass on the paragraph, and then he took his glass away and stood up, and he was a slow man, and I watched him go through it. "That's hand set," he said. "You are certain?" "I've been in this trade 40 year, and I'd know it across a room." He put his thumb beside the lines. "Look at your word spacing. A machine sets a line and justifies it with wedges, and every space in that line is the same, and the whole column's the same, and it's dead even, and it's why the machines come in. Them 4 lines is spaced by a man's thumb out of a case. There's a thick space and 2 thins in the first line, and there's a hair space before the comma in the third, and no machine in the world puts a hair space anywhere, because there isn't one in it. Where in this building is there a case of type that a man may set 4 lines out of, in the small hours, standing at the stone?" Bowyer did not answer for a moment. "There's the ad frames," he said, "and there's the jobbing case. And there's the reader's case in yon closet that we keep for making corrections at the stone when there's no time to send a line back to the machine." "Who uses it?" "The reader," said Nathan Bowyer. I must now record 3 days in which Holmes was entirely wrong, and he has never in the least minded my recording such things, and on this occasion he was wrong for a reason so respectable that I believed him myself from first to last. "Watson, we have been reading this affair as an attack upon Mr. Barnabas Kelso, and I think it is nothing of the kind." "There is a dead man?" "There is a dead man who could not have been foreseen. He was walking about the room with the cutting in his hand. Consider it as a piece of work. If I wished to kill a stranger, would I choose 4 lines of print? It requires that he take in a particular paper, that he read a particular page, that he read it before anyone can soften it for him, and that his heart oblige me. It is the most uncertain instrument in the history of homicide. No sane man would use it and expect a death." "Then what would he expect?" "An action for libel," said Holmes. "Look at what that paragraph does, apart from killing. It states as a fact the death of a living man in 54,000 copies of a newspaper. Frederick Kelso is a farmer of some substance in a British colony with a wife and 3 children and neighbors and a bank, and a report of his death by drowning is worth a very great deal of money to him in the courts, and every farthing of it comes out of the Morning Sentinel. And the paper is more vulnerable than money. Meldon told me on Saturday, and I did not attend to it. They are putting in 3 more machines at the New Year, and they are borrowing to do it. So we spent Friday, Saturday, and Monday upon the enemies of the Morning Sentinel, and there were a satisfactory number of them. We found a rival evening paper whose manager would have paid £100 for the Sentinel's ruin, and had not the wit to compass it. We found a member of Parliament who had been dealt with very roughly in a leading article in August. And on the Saturday afternoon we found Mr. Clement Stollard, who had been a sub-editor on that paper for 9 years and had been dismissed in the July for a piece of carelessness that was not entirely his, and who had written 4 letters to Meldon that got angrier as they went on, and had been heard in a public-house in Bouverie Street to say that he could put a thing in the Sentinel tomorrow that would break it. It was as pretty a case as I have seen Holmes build, and it took him until Monday afternoon to knock down, and he did it himself, and with a good deal of satisfaction. Stollard had gone to Dublin on the 29th of September to a place on the Freeman's Journal, and had been in Dublin on the night of the 13th of October, as 3 men and a lodging-house keeper and a wages book proved. Further and worse, Stollard could not have done it if he had been in Shoe Lane. He had been a sub-editor, and a sub-editor's hands never touch metal, and he could no more have set 4 lines of type out of a case than I could. And that, said Holmes, sitting down at last at about 6 o'clock on the Monday evening, is what comes of being clever about a motive before one has finished being stupid about a method. You have lost nothing but 3 days. I have lost 3 days, and I have learned one thing, which is that I have been trying to make this crime reasonable. He put his feet up on the fender. It is not reasonable. It is the most unreasonable homicide I have ever examined. 4 lines of type cannot be relied upon to kill a man. But they can be relied upon to kill a man with a diseased heart, Watson, and that is a different proposition altogether, and it has been in front of me since Saturday week. He got up and found the file of the Sentinel that Meldon had sent round, and turned it over for perhaps 2 minutes. The 11th of March this year, Mr. Barnabas Kelso has resigned the chairmanship of the Silvertown Colour Company, which he has held for 18 years, upon the advice of his medical attendants. 7 lines in the city notes of the paper in which he was afterwards killed. Holmes closed the file very quietly. Whoever put that paragraph into page 5 on Monday night knew that Barnabas Kelso's heart would not stand a shock, and knew it because he had read it in print, and had very possibly read it in proof. Then he did mean it. He meant it exactly, and he waited 7 months for something, and I do not yet know what he waited for. And now I am going to ask the question I ought to have asked 9 days ago, and did not, because I was busy being ingenious. He turned round. Watson, a man has been killed by 4 lines in a newspaper. What have 4 lines in a newspaper ever done to that man before? We went to the British Museum on the Tuesday morning, and we were there when it opened, and we were there when it shut. There was nothing whatever in Barnabas Kelso's life that pointed anywhere. He had been born at Ipswich in 1831. He had gone into the colour trade in 1864, and had been steady and prosperous and unremarkable for 38 years. And there was no lawsuit, no scandal, no bankruptcy, no dispute, no dismissed servant, and no enemy that his daughter, or his solicitor, or his clergyman could name. But between 1852 and 1863, he had been a newspaper man. Miss Augusta Kelso had told us so, and had thought nothing of it, and had said, when Holmes pressed her, that her father never spoke of those years except once, when a young cousin had talked of going into journalism, and he had said, "I was a penny-a-liner, and I was glad to get out of it, and it is not a trade for a man with a family." He had been, from 1854 to 1859, the Cambridge and Ely correspondent of a weekly paper called the Eastern Counties Courier, published at Norwich, which paid him by the line for such intelligence as he could gather at markets, sessions, inquests, and railway stations across 4 counties, and which is a way of earning 30 shillings a week that has ruined a great many more people than drink. The Courier is in the museum, bound in half years in volumes about the size of a paving stone. We began at the January of 1854, and we read every line of the Cambridge and Ely intelligence for 5 years, and it took us the whole of that day and until 3 o'clock on the Wednesday, and I read the odd volumes and Holmes the even, and I have never been so tired of the doings of the eastern counties. At about 3:15 on the Wednesday afternoon, Holmes said, "Watson," in a voice that made the man at the next desk look up, and I went round to him. He had the volume for the second half of 1858 open at the 14th of October. Commercial. We learn on good authority that the old established firm of Messrs. Gaunt and Son, corn and seed merchants of Wisbeach, have suspended payment. The liabilities are stated to be considerable. Further embarrassments in the trade are anticipated in that quarter. 29 words. We sat in the museum for another 40 minutes and got the rest of it out of that volume and out of the 2 following. And it is a very short and complete history. The paragraph was untrue. Messrs. Gaunt and Son had not suspended payment and were entirely solvent, and Kelso appears to have picked the thing up at Ely Market on the Monday from a man who had it from a man. 2 of the firm's 4 principal creditors read the Courier. On the Saturday, one of them called in an acceptance of £1,100. On the Monday, the bank at Wisbeach declined further accommodation. On the Thursday, the second creditor issued a writ, and on the Saturday week, Hector Gaunt shut the doors of a business his father had founded in 1809. On the 25th of October, at the foot of the 6th column of page 7, the Eastern Counties Courier printed this: "We are informed that our statement respecting the firm of Messrs. Gaunt and Son of Wisbeach was made upon incorrect information, and we regret it." 19 words. Nobody was named. Nobody apologized to anybody. There was an action against the proprietors of the Courier in the following year, which was compromised for £60 and costs, and by then Hector Gaunt had been through the insolvent court, and there was nothing to compromise about. He died in the Wisbeach Union Workhouse in the March of 1863. There was a widow, and there were 4 children, and the eldest was a boy of 9. There is a thing that came back to me at that desk in the museum before I had finished reading the second paragraph, and I had better put it here, because it is the worst sentence in this narrative, and I have put off writing it for 11 pages. In the July, in Queen Anne Street, at the end of an appointment, Mr. Simeon Gaunt had stood up to go, and had turned round at the door and said, in the dry way he had, as though it were a point of grammar, "Doctor, if a man were to be killed by 4 lines of print, would you call it murder?" And I had laughed. I had said something about the law of libel, and something else about the newspapers being the death of us all, and I had asked him whether he had been putting out a rival's eye in a leading article, and he had said, "No, sir," and gone down the stairs. I have been over that 50 times, and I have never once been able to make it into anything but what it is. He asked me. He asked the only man in London who might have listened, 3 months before he did it, and I made a joke about libel, and I did it because I was thinking about my next patient, and because it did not occur to me for 1 instant that a small, clean, gray old man in a brushed coat could mean it. I do not remember the walk from the museum to Baker Street. I remember that Holmes talked the whole way, and that I answered him in the right places, and that when we came into our sitting room, he threw his hat down and said, "Now, that is a family, and it is somewhere, and by tomorrow night I shall have every one of them, and one of them will be in Shoe Lane." And I said, "Holmes, I must go out." He was at the table with his coat half off, and he stopped and looked at me, and I saw him take in my face and read it, which took him about a second and a half. "Sit down," he said. "I cannot." "Then stand up, but do not go out of that door until you have told me whether you are ill." "I am not ill." "No," said Holmes, "you are not ill." I have set down a great many conversations between us over the years, and I have generally given them in full. I shall not give this one in full, because I came out of it having said 4 sentences, and every one of them was chosen with more care than I have ever given to anything I have written, and I do not care to see them in print. What I told him was this: that I could not assist him further in the matter of the Morning Sentinel, that my reason for it was one he would recognize, and would not, I believed, dispute, that I would not tell him what I knew, nor how I came to know it, and that I would not remain in the room while he worked upon it, because I did not trust myself to sit and be silent. He heard the whole of that, standing perfectly still, with his coat over his arm. "Your consulting room," he said. "I have not said so." "No, and I shall not ask. And you will oblige me by not telling me, because if you tell me, I shall use it, and you would afterwards think I had made you do it." He hung his coat on the back of the chair and sat down and began quite deliberately to fill a pipe. "Watson, I am going to say 2 things, and then we shall not speak of it again. The first is that in law you have no privilege whatever. A doctor may be compelled to answer in any court in England, and there is not a case in the books to the contrary, whatever the profession chooses to believe. If I were to lay this before Inspector MacDonald tonight, you could be put in the box and made to speak." "I know it." "Yes, and the second thing is that a man who keeps a confidence he could be compelled to break is keeping it because he has decided to, and not because he is safe, and that is the only kind of confidence worth the name." He got the pipe going. "You will stay in this house. You will not sit and be silent, because I shall not work in front of you. I shall work at Shoe Lane, and at the yard, and in the reading room, and I shall come home and talk to you about the weather, and it will be extremely disagreeable for both of us, and in 4 or 5 days it will be over. And if you cannot do it without me—" "Then a man will get away with a murder," said Holmes, and I shall be very much annoyed, and you will have done right, and I would rather that than the other way about. Go to bed." I wrote a note that night and sent it by hand, and at 9 the next morning Mr. Simeon Gaunt came into my consulting room in Queen Anne Street and sat down in the chair he had sat in 3 weeks before, and put his hat on the floor beside it. "You'll have read it," he said. "I have read it." "Aye." He looked at the window. "I thought you would. You're a reading man." I had spent the night deciding how to begin, and I threw the whole of it away in the first 10 seconds. And what I said was, "I want you to tell me that I am wrong." "I can't do that, Doctor." "That I want you to go with me this morning to Scotland Yard." "No," said Gaunt. We were an hour and a quarter over it, and I got nowhere at all. And I have gone back over that hour a great many times, and I do not believe there was anything I could have said, because he was not fighting me. He was not moving in the way that a wall is not moving, and he answered every argument I put to him with complete courtesy and no interest whatever. I told him that a man was dead. He said, "I know that better than you do." I told him that his silence was making a party to it of a man who had done nothing but treat him for his eyes. He thought about that one for some time, and then he said, "That's the only thing you've said this morning that I'm sorry for, and I am sorry for it, and I'll not give myself up." I told him that Sherlock Holmes would have him inside a week. "He may do," said Gaunt. "I've thought about that, and I've made up my mind to it. But he'll not have me because a doctor told him, and I'll tell you for why, and then I'll go." He picked up his hat and turned it round in his hands. There's 4 lines went into a newspaper in October 1858, and there's not one man in England was ever made to stand up and answer for them, and that's what I've had in my mouth for 44 years. Now there's 4 lines went in this October. If I'm to be took up, I'll be took up right. There's to be evidence, and there's to be a court, and there's to be somebody made to stand up. Me. And a man that gets his evidence out of a sick old fellow's talk in a doctor's room isn't getting it right, and there'd be no answer in it, and I'd not have gone through all this for that. At the door he stopped. "Second Thursday of November," he said. "Shall I come, or shan't I?" I said, "Come," and he said, "Aye," and went down the stairs. What Holmes did in the following 5 days I had from him afterwards, in one sitting, and I set it down in the order in which he had it, because the order is a lesson to me every time I read it over. He began with the family in the ordinary way, and it took him a day and a half. The parish registers at Wisbeach, the insolvent court records, the minute book of the guardians of the Wisbeach Union, and the books of the Provincial Typographical Association gave him the whole of it. Hector Gaunt, corn and seed merchant, insolvent 1859, died in the Union Workhouse 1863. Martha, his widow, died at March in 1871. 4 children, 2 daughters, 1 dead at 11, and 1 married in Lincolnshire. A son, Aaron, who went to America in 1874, and Simeon, born 1849, apprenticed to a printer in Wisbeach in 1860 at 11 years of age. In Lynn in 1866, in London in 1868, and on the staff of the Morning Sentinel since 1872, and its second reader since 1880. He then did the thing that I think is the best piece of work in the case, and it did not require him to leave a cupboard on the second floor of the Sentinel office. A printer's reader queries. It is the marrow of the trade. When he meets in a proof a statement he does not believe, or a name he does not know, or a date that will not do, he does not correct it, because it is not his to correct. He writes it out on a query slip, and it goes up to the sub-editor's room, and the slip comes back with an answer on it, or does not come back at all.
And the Sentinel, being a well-run office, filed those slips by the month, and had done so since 1874, and there were 28 years of them in a cupboard behind the reader's closet, in bundles tied with string, and nobody had opened one of them for a decade. Holmes read 4,000 of them, and he found 2. The first is dated the 9th of June, 1888, and it refers to a printed list of subscribers to the funds of a children's hospital, and it is in a small, upright hand, and it says, Page 3, Column 5, List of Donations. Mr. B. Kelso, Elm Park Gardens, £100. Is this Kelso late of the Eastern Counties Courier? G. Across the bottom of it, in blue pencil, a sub-editor long since dead has written, No idea. Leave as printed. The second is dated the 11th of March, 1902. Page 8, Column 2, City. Mr. Barnabas Kelso has resigned the chairmanship upon the advice of his medical attendants. Query. Attendants. Is this the heart? G. And across the bottom of that one, in a different blue pencil, yes, angina, 2 attacks, leave it. There is the whole of it, Watson, said Holmes when he showed me those 2 slips. 14 years apart, in his own hand, in his employer's cupboard, filed by their own clerk. In June of 88 he found the man. In the March of this year he was told in writing by a colleague who thought he was being obliging precisely how the man could be killed, and in October he waited for the 14th, because he had waited 14 years for a date and was not going to spoil it by a fortnight. The rest was mechanical, and he did it in 2 days. Edward Aspinall broke on the Saturday, and Holmes says that he did not have to be broken so much as allowed. The boy had been sitting in that closet 6 nights a week for 2 years, reading copy aloud to a man whose sight was going, and for the last 11 months he had been quietly doing more than his own work, reading the proofs himself where the old man could not, and telling him what was in them, and saying nothing to anybody, because Gaunt had 24 shillings a week and no pension, and nowhere at all to go. He had lied 7 times to protect that. When he understood what he was protecting, he sat down on the stone floor of the composing room and cried. And then he told Holmes that at about 25 minutes past 1 on the morning of the 14th, Mr. Gaunt had sent him out to the coffee stall at the top of the lane, and had asked him particularly to bring back a can and not a cup, and that he had been gone 11 or 12 minutes, and that it had never happened before in 2 years. Nathan Bowyer, taken back over his own book, remembered that when he came up from the machine room at about 1:30, the reader was at the stone with a composing stick in his hand, which was not unusual, because a reader corrects at the stone all night, and that page 5 had been moulded at 10 minutes to 2, and that he himself, God forgive him, had passed the revise with the 4 lines on it,
because it had already been read and initialed by the man whose business it was to read it. And there was no copy. There never had been any copy. Holmes had spent 9 days looking for a piece of paper, and there was no piece of paper, and he told me that the moment he understood why, he was ashamed. A paragraph exists twice, Watson, once as writing and once as metal, and the whole apparatus of a newspaper exists to carry it from the one state to the other through as many hands as possible. But if the man who wrote it is also the man who sets it, the writing stage may be dispensed with altogether. He composed it in his head over 7 months, and he set it out of a case with his own fingers, and there was never at any moment a piece of paper with those words on it in that building. The absence of copy is not a gap in my evidence. It is my evidence. It tells me that the author and the compositor were one man, and there were exactly 4 men on that floor who could set a line of type at the stone, and one of them had been reading Barnabas Kelso's name in proof for 14 years. They took him at 1:20 in the morning of Wednesday the 5th of November in the glass closet with the machines going below. Holmes had sent me a wire at 11 o'clock which said, "It is finished, and it was not you. Come to Shoe Lane at 1. I went, and I am glad I went, and I would not go again. Inspector Alec MacDonald was there, and Meldon and Bowyer at the door. Gaunt was on his high chair, with a galley-proof in front of him, and his lens in his hand, and when we came in he put the lens down and looked at Holmes for a moment, and then said, "You've been in the query slips." "I have. I thought of them in the summer, and I let them be." He said it thoughtfully, as a workman admits an oversight. "You can't take out everything. There's always one." MacDonald began the caution, and Gaunt lifted a hand and stopped him quite gently, and then took out of the breast pocket of his coat a pocket-book, and out of the pocket-book a piece of newspaper the color of weak tea, folded in 4, mounted on a leaf of card, and covered with a piece of oiled silk. He put it on the bench and turned it round for us to read, and it was the Eastern Counties Courier of the 14th of October, 1858, and there were the 29 words. "I've carried that since I were 14-year-old," he said. "It were give me by my mother in the workhouse yard, and she said that's what done it, and I couldn't read it right then because I hadn't the letters. I learned them off it." He put his finger on the paper without touching it. "Look at that. We learn on good authority. There weren't no authority. He had it off a fellow at Ely Market, who had it off another fellow, and he wanted his line money, and he sent it in on the Tuesday night, and I've known his name since the 9th of June, 1888, and I've read it in print in my own paper 11 times since, and I've marked his errors for him. I've corrected that man's punctuation." Nobody said anything at all. Somewhere under our feet the machines were running the 3rd edition. "Mr. Holmes, you'll want to know how it went in, and I'll tell you, and I'd sooner it were took down." Gaunt turned to MacDonald. "Are you writing?" "I am." "On the Monday night, at about 1:20, I sent the lad for coffee. I had the stick, and I had the case, and I set it out of the case 4 lines, in the body letter, in about 7 minutes, and I've set type for 42 year, and I could do it in the dark, which is as well, because I very near did. I unlocked the coins of page 5, and I took out 4 lines of the Rotherhithe fire, and I put mine in and locked it up again, and pulled a revise and read it and initialed it, and it went to the mold at 10 minutes to 2. And I put the 4 lines of the fire back in the case, letter by letter, before the lad come up the stairs with the can. He folded his hands. There's the whole of it. There's no accomplice, and there's nobody in this building knew a thing about it. And if any man says otherwise, he's mistook. You knew of Mr. Kelso's heart. I knew of it in March, in a query slip, in his own paper. You intended his death.
I intended his death, said Simeon Gaunt, and I'd thought about it since the 9th of June, 1888, and I couldn't see any way to do it that were right until March. There's no satisfaction in a knife. Any fool can use a knife. He looked up, and it is the only moment in the whole affair when I saw anything move in that grey face. It had to be the same. It had to be 4 lines in a newspaper that weren't true, and it had to go in the way his went in, off nobody's authority, and nobody paying for it, and nobody's name to it. His were about a man's trade, because a trade were what my father had. Mine had to be about what Kelso had, and what Kelso had were a son. I gave it 7 months, and I've no complaint of how it went. Then he said the sentence that I have never been able to get out of my head, and he said it to me, not to Holmes. Doctor, I've took 11 million errors out of other men's work. I put one in. Frederick Kelso came over in the December, and I met him once, at Holmes's request, in the coffee room of a hotel in Craven Street, and I am glad to have met him. He was 38 and burnt brown, and about 6 inches taller than his father had been, and he had come 4,000 miles in the worst month of the year, and was going back in the spring, because there was a farm, and 3 children and a wife at Selkirk, and there was nothing for him in England any more. He had his father's way of standing with his hands behind him. "I've been told the whole of it," he said. "Mr. Meldon came to me the first morning and told me the whole of it before his lawyers got at him, and I'll not forget that of him." "You are suing the paper." "I'm suing the paper for a great deal of money, and I shall get it, and I've told them so, and they know it, and there's no ill feeling in it on either side." He turned his cup round. "Doctor, I'll tell you what I can't get past, and my wife says I'm to stop saying it, and I can't. It's the 4 lines themselves. I've read them about 100 times. Formerly of this city, in his 38th year. He got my age right. He got the river right, near enough. The Red is 9 miles from my land. He knew I'd been on the Selkirk side, and not at Winnipeg. He had been reading you in print for 14 years. Aye, that's what I can't get past." Frederick Kelso looked up. "I never had a letter from my father in 9 years that ran to more than half a page. He couldn't write to me. He'd sit down, and he couldn't do it. And there was a man in Shoe Lane who knew my age and my river and the year I sailed, and he'd never seen either of us. He was in court in the January, every hour of it, in the same seat, and he never once made a sound. The rest is law, and it does not make agreeable reading. The Treasury took 9 days over it, and Holmes was consulted twice, and was, I think, more useful the second time than the first, and the opinion that came back
was signed by a very eminent man, and ran to 14 pages, and its substance can be given in a paragraph. There was no assault. Nothing whatever was done to the body of Barnabas Kelso. He was not touched, not poisoned, not frightened by any person in his presence, not deprived of medicine or of air. He read a printed statement in a newspaper, which he had bought and opened himself, in his own house, at his own table, and his heart failed. Between the act of the accused in Shoe Lane and the death in Elm Park Gardens, there lay the printing of 54,000 copies, a distribution to 1,100 newsagents, a delivery by a boy, and the free act of a daughter in opening the paper, and of a father in taking it out of her hands. The law of England knew of no case in which such a chain had been held to be a killing, and counsel would not undertake to persuade a judge that it was one. And if a jury were nevertheless asked to convict, and did convict, the conviction would not stand. They charged manslaughter, because they could think of nothing else, and because Meldon and Frederick Kelso and a good many other people would not have borne it if they had charged nothing at all. It was tried at the Central Criminal Court in the January before Mr. Justice Ledsham, and it lasted a day and a half, and Gaunt's own confession was read out to the jury in full, and at the close of the case for the Crown, counsel for the defense submitted that there was no evidence of any act done by the prisoner which the law could regard as causing death. The judge took 35 minutes. He said that he was not deciding what the prisoner had done, which was plain enough, nor what he had intended, which was plainer. He was deciding what the law would permit a jury to call manslaughter, and that in his judgment there was no case upon which they could properly be asked to convict, and he directed a verdict of not guilty. He then said something short about the prisoner, which was not reported in full in any paper, and which I have from a man who was in court, and it was to the effect that he left the dock without a stain upon him in law, and with one that no court in this country was competent to remove. Simeon Gaunt asked to be allowed to say something, and was not permitted, and was discharged. He had been dismissed by the Morning Sentinel on the 5th of November, within an hour of his arrest, and there was not a printing house in London that would have taken him afterwards, and by the February he could not have read a proof if they had. He had 24 shillings a week, and no pension, and he had lived in one room in Wynite Street, off the City Road, for 19 years. He came to Baker Street on the 2nd Thursday of April, 1903, which was a raw, bright afternoon, and Mrs. Hudson brought up his name, and Holmes said, "Show him up," without any expression at all. He would not sit down. He stood on the hearthrug, with his hat in both hands, a small grey man, with his spectacles pushed up on a forehead that was no longer any use to him. And he said that he had come to ask one question, and that he would not stop. "Ask it," said Holmes. "Did he read it?" "Say what you mean." "There were 4 lines," said Gaunt. "I was 7 months over them. There's a word in the second line I changed 3 times. He was turning the hat round. "Did he read the 4 lines, or did he read the name and no more?" Holmes stood at the window with his back to us, and did not answer for what seemed to me a long time, and when he did answer, his voice was perfectly level. Miss Kelso opened the paper before her father came to the table. She read the first 4 words aloud without understanding them, cried out, and folded it. He took it from her, opened it at the crease, read the name and the 2 words before it, and said, "That is not right." His eyes did not travel. He was dead in 11 minutes, and he never read 1 word of your 2nd line, nor of your 3rd, nor of your 4th. He was never told what was supposed to have happened to his son, or where, or on what day. He died believing something about Frederick that you had not troubled to put in. You can't know that. You weren't in the room. Miss Kelso kept the paper. It is folded on her crease, and it has lain in a drawer since that morning. And it is folded so that the 1st line and a part of the 2nd stand uppermost, and the rest is turned under. And there is a mark of butter on it from his thumb, and the mark is under your 4th word. Holmes turned round from the window. He held it there. He did not open it out. I have known that since the 19th of October, and I have been keeping it for you. The old man stood quite still. "Then there's no answer in it," he said at last. "There was never going to be any answer in it," said Holmes. "That is what nobody could tell you in 58, and nobody has been able to tell you since. Good afternoon, Mr. Gaunt." He went down the 17 stairs and out into Baker Street, and I never saw him again. He died at the Whitechapel Infirmary in the November of 1904, and Holmes paid for the funeral, and has never mentioned it, and I only know of it because I saw the account. There is one more thing, and then I have done. I have been asked, by 2 men whose opinion I respect, whether I did right in that fortnight, and I have given them both the same answer, which is that I do not know. I know that I would do the same again. I know that if Holmes had failed, an old man who had murdered another old man would have gone on reading proofs in Shoe Lane until his eyes gave out, and that it would have been my doing. And I know what Holmes said once in the March, when I raised it for the last time. "You are asking me whether the confidence was worth a man's life," he said. It was not. Nothing is worth a man's life. That is what makes the arithmetic impossible and the rule necessary. If you had told me on the Wednesday, I should have had him on the Thursday and been in bed by 10, and I should have thought no better of you, and neither would you. There are perhaps 4 people in England from whom I would take a flat refusal without pressing it, and I have arranged my life so that one of them lives upstairs.